Great, thanks, Donna. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Board of Finance recommended budget public hearing, May 5th, 2020. I want to start with a roll call of the Board of Finance members, and I'll start with myself. This is Dave Vesci. I'm the chair of the Board of Finance. Mal?
Mal Leichter, Vice Chair.
Good, thanks, Mal. Janet?
Janet Badowski here.
Great, thank you. Diane?
Diane Del Rosso.
Great, thanks, Diane. And Mike?
Mike McCormick here.
Awesome. Okay, so all Board of Finance members are present. Before I start on the presentation, just want to kind of some house rules or housekeeping rules. Just want to make sure that everybody can mute their phones. And this is mainly like the board clerk, people taking a record of the meeting sometimes have a tough time hearing everything. So if we could just have everybody mute, and those new to the GoToMeeting, in order to mute, just where your name is, there should be a little microphone there. So if you click on it, it will go from green to red, and if you click on it again, it'll go from red back to green, and you'll be able to talk. Okay, thank you. So Donna, can you bring up the presentation and our agenda for tonight? So just the next slide, please. Okay, great, thank you. So tonight we're going to go through, this is a public hearing, and we're going to go through, going to start with what the budget process was and how it's changed this year because of COVID-19. Then we're going to spend a few slides talking about the projected budget expenditures. From there, we're going to talk about the capital improvements or the larger capital projects or projects over $75,000. And then after we're done with the large capital projects, we're going to move on over to talk about the other side, talk about revenue, how we're projecting to pay for the expenditures and what that means to everyone's taxes. And then we're going to start wrapping up with future considerations that looking at not only at this year's budget, but trying to foresee budgets in the next couple of years, what are going to be the positives or the headwinds versus the tailwinds for future budgets for us. And then we'll open it up to public comments. And then, with that said, as I'm going through, this is, usually I'm giving this presentation in front of more of a live audience at the RHAM auditorium. There's a lot of numbers in these pages. I'm going to try to go through a slide and just pause. And anybody feel free if they want to make a comment. You can either type comment in the chat window, and we'll be looking for that, or you just simply unmute your phone and try to get my attention before I go on to the next slide. And then I'll ask the Board of Finance members and the town staff that's on the call if I say something that you want to correct or you want to add on, please feel free to do so as well at the end of the slide. Okay, Donna, we can go to the next slide, please, on the budget process. So I mentioned, typically the budget process, we would be having a referendum. Actually, I think the referendum was scheduled to be today, but instead, we're not having a vote. And so an executive order that Governor Lamont had made and was enacted by the Board of Selectmen in April, decision was made that the Board of Finance would be setting the budget and setting the mill rate. So next Wednesday evening, the 13th, the same board, the Board of Finance, will be getting together to finalize the budget and to set the mill rate for the next year. And what is included in the budget as of now, we'll go to the expenditures. So this is a high level look at all the expenditures. So general government that's your town government. So it's town staff and the services they provide. The Hebron Board of Education represents our pre-K through 6th grade. The RHAM Board of Ed is the next line, and that is our grades 7 through 12. And this line represents the Hebron share of the RHAM budget. And then the last line there is the debt that we have with the RHAM project, for this year, sorry. Okay, and then going into details, or actually before going into details, we're looking at budget reductions next. So when Town Manager Tierney put together the budget. He presented it to us on March 1st. A lot has changed since March 1st. So you see the original budget that was presented was 36.6 or close to 36.7 million. The town budget has a reduction of about $300,000 since we started this process. The Hebron Board of Ed budget is the same as when we started. And then the RAM budget has about a $600,000 decrease. So there's about, I think this totals about $940,000 decrease in expenditures from town manager's original budget on March 1st. Now to more of the details in the expenditures. So that, you know, those numbers at 35.7 million in total. So we'll start with the town government. And we see an increase in the town government. We have a slide next that'll show most of the budget drivers of what makes up the town government increases. And then going down, I mentioned earlier about the capital improvement projects. So again, those are ones that are above 75,000, and we have slides later that'll show each of those projects. We have a contribution to open space that's remaining flat. Then we have contributions to capital projects, and those are projects between $5,000 and $75,000. And we have a slide that shows all of those. Contribution to reevaluation, so it's relatively flat from last year. And then debt services is the next line, and that is an increase mainly due to, if people had remembered last year's budget, we had a vote on the WPCA as well as town to go out to bonding for those two projects. Actually, that was last general election when we voted on that. So those were both approved. So this represents a portion for next year that we're estimating for the WPCA project for the sewer upgrades. So those numbers total our town government. That'll match the previous slides. And then you see the same lines for the Hebron Board of Ed and the RAM Board of Ed, as well as the debt services, comes out to the total. So this is what makes up most of this represents about 90% of the increase in the town services. So the big items you see there are the contractual salary increases, an increase to the wetlands, the hours for the wetlands agent, increase in the public safety line into EMT hours. So those are big drivers, as well as the medical insurance driver. So again, I said all those up to the capital projects line, those represent about 90% of the increase that we saw on the previous slide for the total government. And then the debt services, again, is the WPCA is what's driving that, is the sewer upgrade project. Okay, thanks, Donna. You're keeping up with me. This is good. This slide is just showing over time how the expenditures have gone from 17-18 up through what we're proposing right now tonight. So again, the same lines on this slide. So looking at the total government, the CIP, capital projects, et cetera, and how they compare year to year. And next slide is something similar for the Hebron Board of Ed. You can see how the Board of Ed budget has been 17-18 up through current, and seeing that, as you know, 17-18 was 11.5, and current is again 11.5, or in the same range there. Okay, next category on expenditures is the RAM. So again, grades 7 through 12 are middle and high school. The 29 million, or close to $30 million, this represents the total RAM budget for all three towns, as well as the capital improvements that they have in their budget of $343,000. And then below is Hebron's share of the RAM budget and how that compares. So you see that decrease for Hebron in the operating levy, as well as in the debt services. And the next slide just shows us how we come up with the levy. Don, are we able to go to the next slide? Oop. Actually, we got one more in between, Donna. Can you go back one? Great, perfect. Okay, so this is the RHAM levy. So the RHAM levy is the simple calculation based on the enrollment of students at RHAM within the 3 towns. And you see how Hebron from 17-18, we used to have 54% of the population. That's down to 48%. And it looks like, Andover and Marlboro, we were down about 6%, and Andover and Marlboro each increased about 3%. So they're taking on more of the load for the RHAM budget. And then next slide, Donna, thank you, is the pie chart. So I think you've heard, or people have heard, when we refer to the education, and what we usually do is we add up the RHAM pie and the Board of Ed pie. So this is a nice picture to quickly show you that 73% of our total budget goes into education, and the remaining 27% is in the town side. Last year, the split was 75% school, 25% town. So a slight change in those percentages. Okay, and then this is another slide showing the last few years, again, trying to illustrate how expenses have gone. So the top line is the RHAM budget, the middle line is the Hebron Board of Ed, and the lower line there is the general government budget. So you see how those have gone over the last 10 years or so. Okay, then I mentioned earlier about the capital improvement. So these are all projects over 75,000. You'll notice there's a couple in there that are below 75,000, but those are phases of a larger project. So for instance, the lowest one there, Peter's House restoration, that's 25,000, but that's a multi-year project. So the total for that project was over 75,000. But these capital improvement ones, the road resurfacing is typically their largest item in the CIP. And the Board of Selectmen had approved to bring to us in the budget the Wall Street sidewalks. So that's a project that is in coordination with the RHAM work that's going to be done, or going to begin in this summer. So these will be sidewalks that go from RHAM up to Ridge Road, that area. And then you see, I guess those are the highlights I want to bring up, but those are all the projects right now. And this list was a much larger list that the town manager and the Board of Selectmen weeded down to come to these 6 items to put in the capital project or the capital improvement plan. And then this slide is just showing the revenue that comes, how we're going to pay for the capital improvement. And the bottom line, the general fund contribution is relatively flat. It's 590,000. So that's the contribution that we're going to get for CIP, keeping that level flat from last year. And next slide is showing the smaller capital projects, and I think I made a mistake earlier. I said from 5 to 75,000, so it's actually $10,000 to $75,000 projects. And these ones, the highlights here are the 2 projects in Douglas Library. So the Douglas Library flooring and the window replacement project.
David, it's Mel. If I could make a comment on that slide.
Sure. Yep.
There have been some questions as to why the small capital projects increase so much. And we've got to keep in mind that in this current, or I should say in the next fiscal year, the number where CIP starts is at 75,000. This current year, it started at 25,000. As I look at this, all but 2 of these items were in capital. The CIP to begin with, or I should say to end with, last year. And in fact, I guess if we're putting the window replacement in this list, I guess my question is, why are we not putting the Peter's House in this list? The Douglas Library window replacement, this is the 3rd year of it. So this is also a repeated year of the Peter's House. So they both should be in the same list. But my point is simply that out of $118,000 here, probably all but about 30,000 of it came over from capital because of the change in value. Thank you.
Thanks, Mal. That's a great point, and thank you for bringing it up because we did have a change in definition, right, between one year and the other. So this is the 1 year. This is the first year that it happened. So you're going to have a little bit of, I guess, for lack of a better term, lumpiness in your line items that you have there in your budget. So next year we're going to have more of an apples to apples comparison of that the capital improvement plan is things just over 75,000.
Chairman Beshi, I can clarify the difference between the Peters House and why that is still in CIP, and the Douglas Library flooring and window replacement are in this category. It was the original total project amount, so each of those originally was under the 75,000. And the Peters House is over 75,000. So that's why the flooring and the windows are now in the 10 to 75 category.
Okay, thank you, Donna. Okay, so that wraps up the expenditure side. And now going to the next slide, we're going over to how we're expected to, or what monies are going to come in to pay for those proposed expenditures. So on the last line here, obviously the largest one is taxes. So we're seeing right now, as the budget stands, there'll be a little lower impact to everyone's taxes. So the tax revenue expected to go down slightly. And I bring your attention up to the third line item out there is the ECS. So that's education cost sharing. So just bringing that up because it's a large number, and that's talked about a lot at the state is what will happen to education cost sharing for the towns. So right now, we're expected to get for this year's budget close to $6 million. So it's $5,997,000. That represents it's about 16.8% of our revenue coming in into Hebron is coming directly for those ECS grants there. So that's I'll talk later when we say future considerations. That's obviously a large number in our budget that we have to be mindful of that's coming from the state. We don't have much control over that from year to year. Okay, then once we're established the revenue, where the revenues are going to come from, we're calculating the mill rate, and we're calculating the mill rate based on a collection rate of 98.5%, and that's historically that seems like a good or a conservative number for us to estimate. And with that, that would bring our mill rate to 36.33. And that's compared to our current mill rate, which is 37.05. And Don, if you can go to the next slide, and I think we have Mal to thank for putting this together, I think, which I like this slide. So this is showing our 11-year history of total expenditures. And then the red line in the middle there is showing the mill rate over time. And so to, for lack of, trying to be a comedian here during a pandemic, but I know we've heard a lot about flattening the curve. And right here, Mal's chart is showing us trying to flatten the curve on the mill rate side instead of some other flattening of curves. But you do see how right now the proposed mill rate of 36.33 would have us at a mill rate similar to the rates we were at 3, 4, 5 years ago. So you see how that's been relatively flat. Okay, then this slide is now trying to make it more personal as far as what's the impact of the budget to your own personal taxes. So this slide represents 3 different homes in Hebron. The first line is one that's in a lower valued home, around $215,000, and that home should be getting a tax decrease of about $100, about $109 we're showing here. A mid-size home around a $300,000 market value in Hebron is going to have about $151 or $150 change in taxes. And in the higher end homes above $500,000, going to see a tax reduction in the $200 to $300 range. So a couple things that happened over the last 6 weeks or so, a couple decisions. So another executive order by Governor Lamont gave the ability down to the towns to provide a grace period for their taxes. So the Board of Selectmen voted last month that instead of the typical grace period of 30 days for the July taxes, that will be extended to 90 days. So the taxes that are due July 1st can be paid all the way up to October 1st without any kind of penalty. And then the second action the Board of Selectmen took was that we have a longstanding policy for people with limited income that are having trouble paying taxes, that as they defer taxes, there's an interest rate charge. Last year's interest rate was 3%. The Board of Selectmen, with the low interest rate environment and with everything that's happening, decided to lower that interest rate down to 1.5%. Okay, and then last slide here is, I mentioned earlier about future considerations and I mentioned earlier about the state funding and the ECS money. So that's, again, something that the Board of Finance, we think about a lot. Not much we can do about, and we really can't control, but we know that about 17% of our budget is based on those ECS monies coming in. And so if those are reduced in the future, depending on what happens here as the pandemic plays out, monies from federal to state down to local, that could potentially have an impact on next year's budget for us. We mentioned also the WPCA sewer program, so the debt attached to that. Potentially with a new public works building. We know that the public works facility right now is very crowded, and if a new public works facility were to be built, that would have an impact on our future budgets. And then obviously with we really don't know what'll happen with COVID-19. We're going to be monitoring it as best we can as things come in, but we're going to have to adapt to the changing times there as needed. Now, conversely, on the positive side, we do know that, especially at RHAM, we do know that future school enrollments are going to go down. I believe the RHAM enrollments for the next 5 years, at least, they're showing some large decreases in enrollment. So that'll be a positive to the budget or the next few years' budgets. We also know that the RHAM debt, the original RHAM building debt, will be coming off the books in the next couple of years. So that'll be a positive when we debate on future budgets. And then Colebrook Village, each year, their tax liability goes up 20% each year. So that's going to have a tailwind for us as well in next year's budget and the budget year after that. Okay, and then that just leads me now to comments or questions. And in this format, probably easiest if anybody did have a comment or a question, just go up to the chat box on the top right of your screen and just say that you want to make a comment, and then we can go down the list of everybody that wants to make a comment. So we can hold off for a minute or so, and then Donna, you can let me know if anybody has raised their hand virtually, and we can go from there. Usually, I'm watching like Governor Cuomo's and Trump's press conferences. Usually there's a lot of questions right away, so feel free to. Okay, are there any public comments or questions?
There is Tiffany Thiel has a public comment.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Tiffany. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll keep it brief. I just want to say that I just want to speak in support of this budget. I think the town has done a really great job of balancing its needs with today's economic climate. I also want to thank the Hebron Board of Education for creating a budget that's fair to taxpayers, but also maintains a great education for our children. I strongly believe that budgets are a reflection of our values as a town. And I think it's important that we take care of our people in our schools. So I want to especially thank the town manager and his team for their hard work during this crisis. And if there were a referendum, the budget would have my vote. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. Any other comments, Donna?
None at this time.
Dan Larson, I would like to speak.
Great. Go ahead, Dan.
Again, I want to also express my thanks to not only all the town staff, but all the board members who have given up so much of their time and selfishly or unselfishly, I should say, have worked towards this kind of a budget reduction. I think this is a very good and fair and proper budget, and I really urge that it be passed and moved forward. The items that are in our CIP, a lot of them are safety oriented. I do find it sad that we did have to take the bridge out again to try to keep taxes down. And I'm hoping that in future years we'll be able to get that back on the table. But as I say, this is a good and adequate and a fair budget. And I think we've done an incredible job, the Hebron staff and all, to have a budget decrease when most towns are looking at severe budget increases and no one knows what next year's going to bring. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
Chairman Vesey, we did receive one email since last week on the budget. If you'd like me to read that into the record.
That would be great. Thanks, Donna.
Okay. So this was received this afternoon from Paul Honore of Ridge Road. In view of the fact that these budgets were formulated before the pandemic, I think the board should at the very least go with no increase over the previous year's budget. Even better would be a reduction from the previous year. The state is projecting massive revenue shortfalls, and no one can project what that means for the towns. It's likely the state will be cutting aid to towns. We don't even know if schools will be opening in the fall. Open space and capital improvements would be places to start the cuts. Paul Honore, 44 Ridge Road.
Okay, thanks, Donna. And any other comment? And if not, I think, Donna, can we put up the next slide just to make sure people know that they could reach out to us with any questions? Thank you. So this is the email address that you can send any questions or comments to. And again, we will be having a session next Wednesday, the 13th at 7 o'clock, another virtual meeting. That's when we'll be setting the budget and the mill rate. And after we close the public hearing part, we're going to shift over quickly to a special meeting of the Board of Finance where we'll deliberate further on the budget. So if there's no other questions or comments, I think, I guess we have a motion to adjourn the public hearing.
Mike McCormick, so moved.
Thank you, Mike. I guess I'll second that so we can adjourn the public hearing. And then, Donna, do we have a commercial break or anything in between the special meeting, or we just go, is this sponsored by anybody, or? That's tough. Okay. It's tough getting laughs in a virtual meeting here. I need the cues.
You
Okay.
need the sound.
I need, yeah. So Donna, let's we can just go right to the special meeting, I assume. So I will call to order Board of Finance special meeting Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. And if we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And thanks, Donna, for showing the flag. And if you just pop up the agenda, our next section is public comment. And again, if you want to make public comment, either just unmute your phone or type comment in the chat box that you want to make a public comment. Okay, since we just had public comment in the other one, I assume that was going to be the case. So our next item on the agenda is, to review the public hearing discussion and comments. And we had a couple comments, right? We had a few there, and it seemed like majority is thinking that the budget is sound as is. And I think we've had some that would like us to lower it potentially a little bit, but I don't know if anybody's got any other comments we want to make before we go into the budget deliberation section. Okay, if no discussion, just going to agenda item number 5. And the reason why we had this special meeting, because originally we weren't going to have it, but Donna and Andy had contacted me on Friday, and I think the concern is just, since we don't have a vote, that if we were going to make any changes to the budget, up or down, that we would need to do it and allow the public to react to it. And so by us meeting tonight, and if we make any actions to change again, to reduce or increase the budget, this would then allow people to email us with any comments before we make our final recommendation or final decision next Wednesday, the 13th. So that's the reason why we held you here for this. So right now, and just to tee this up, I think in our, to go back a couple meetings with the Board of Selectmen, it looked like the Board of Selectmen were very close on a budget. Probably the largest difference that they were debating was maybe upwards of like $200,000. Then when we deliberated last week, I think we were saying either flat or probably at most cutting the budget. I don't think anybody was having an opinion about increasing the budget, but potentially cutting the budget so that the dollars were the same as last year. So I think the most we were thinking of reducing was $86,000 to make it even dollar amount from last year's expenditures. So with that said, I leave it up to the Board of Finance members, my fellow members, if anybody wants to make a motion about the budget as it stands right now, or wants to just offer some comments or discussion.
Dave, it's Mike McCormick. I will throw out a comment, and I'm not necessarily proposing that there be any cuts to the budget, but having heard some of the public comments in favor of reducing the budget if possible, and having attended the meetings of the Board of Selectmen, I think there was some discussion about cutting out one of the capital improvement projects. I think it was the truck or something like that. So I just throw it out there that if there's any inclination for us to reduce the budget in response to what we have heard to date, I would think it's an area where we could start. But again, I'm not necessarily proposing it. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
I was now trying to speak. I can't hear him. I thought I saw his mouth moving.
He's mute. Okay.
His mic is on. Can't hear you, Mel.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yes, we can.
That's interesting. I turned the mic off, turned it back on, and you can hear me. Okay.
Oh, perfect.
We can't see you.
What?
We can't see you. Oh, there you are.
Okay. I would like to, as past chairman of CIP, I would just like to refresh some memories here. Capital improvement was started back in the late 80s, early 90s. Donna, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And at the time it was created, the intent was to apply several, I believe it was 2 mills to the budget each year to fund capital projects. Now, these are capital items or projects. These are items that now are over $75,000. But if you take 2% of our budget, it's a lot more than $500,000 of contribution. And even when you add in the extra, the revenue that we have, dollars coming back from other projects, returns of dollars on state projects where there's money that comes back to us on those, we're still well below. We should be contributing over 1.6 million a year to stick with that. That's never happened. And more importantly, I mean, those are numbers can change. More importantly, the best way to put this town into a financial tailspin worse than it was, or worse than it is, what the economy is to stop buying essential items like ambulances, snow plows, etc. To take you back when I first joined CIP, we hadn't bought plow trucks in years. All of them were falling apart. The then public works director went to the state and bought, I believe, 4 used plow trucks just so we could plow the roads. Then we were replacing 2 trucks a year for about 4 years in order to get the fleet back up to where it needed to be. Now we have a truck with a broken frame. Personally, I cannot see going out and not replacing that plow truck, because if we willingly, knowingly put a town employee in a truck that's got a major issue such as a cracked frame, and that frame were to let go, we'd be in major trouble, and I think our employees deserve better than that. So I would be opposed to cutting the plow truck. I would be opposed to cutting anything at this point that was going to put us further behind in CIP. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mel.
I was wondering if anyone would be open to lowering the open space, maybe to like 100,000 instead of 140,000. We've purchased a lot of large things lately, and this would still keep us, putting money towards it, but would bring it down a little. Thoughts?
This is Mel. I'd definitely be willing to talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is Dave. So I have a talk because I'm actually on open space. So
okay, good. Then you have some...
I'm willing to talk about it. I think the reason why they were trying to leave it the same is I know that there was a larger piece of land that they've been looking at for years that appears to be coming to the market. And that's why they had actually asked, I believe they had asked for close to 200,000. And we talked them down to leave it flat at 140, flat compared to this current year.
And is the piece of land part of the planning, or is it just, like, because we want it just to have open space, or was it part of a larger plan?
Yeah, great question, Janet. And I'm not sure how much I can go into detail or how much it's confidential, but it does. It borders the trail, the airline trail. So a big piece bordering the airline trail, which is part of the plan of linking all the trails and going all the way up through the center of town.
I was. This is Mal. I was on open space for 6 years, and they do a great job. I think that they are an essential area or essential committee of keeping the town as rural as it is. And I think if we go through and we talk with our residents, that's why many of them are here. Now, on the other hand, they have bought a lot of land. And I guess my question is, if they didn't get this additional 40,000, would they be able to do that deal? and we don't need any prices. I'm not asking what's left in their fund, although that has already been disclosed. But would the 40,000 or the lack of the 40,000 prohibit them from doing that deal? If anybody knows.
I don't know off the top of my head, Mal. I know that that deal would exhaust pretty much their budget, so they would be, so that, again, that's why they were looking for closer to 200,000 in this budget with that particular piece of land in mind. And then it may be something where they might be short or it might be tight, but for that particular piece, they are going to the state that they would only purchase it if we were going to get some state money as well. So that money would come back after, but the initial, they would be upfront and they'd be tight.
Thanks, David.
And how do we feel about this, that the state would have extra money to give us? With all the changes.
Yep.
That's a great question.
That's a good point. Yep. Don't know. Yep. And then something like that, again, that particular piece, they would not purchase if they weren't, or I don't believe the spirit of the conversation in that meeting was to purchase it if we weren't getting state funding for it, which would, the state funding for those has been around 50-60% of the total cost. And that's the only reason why they would be purchasing it in the first place.
And they have been great stewards of our dollars. They really have.
Oh, I agree.
I can elaborate if you want.
Oh, thank you, Andy.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so the reason Open Space is requesting the same amount is the two last purchases of property were to assist the town itself in the St. Peter's parcel, and then the Horton parcel where we're going to do hopefully municipal complex. So they helped us offset with some of their funds to purchase both of those pieces of property. And then as David and Mel just stated, they're going to apply for a grant for another large section of property that fits their charge and the criteria that they work under. And they were hoping, because of their assistance with the town and the other purchases, that we would fund the monies that are asked in this budget because of that.
I think with that information, I would be a lot less inclined to want to reduce them, because I had actually forgotten that they had contributed to those two purchases. I did know it, but hadn't thought of it that way.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
In the past few days, in speaking with several people, our superintendent being one of them, he shared with me that the bigger things to worry about are not what's going on right now, but what could possibly happen in the fall. And the fact that, and these are my words, not Dr. Barrett's words, our cheapest way out of this would probably be to keep schools closed, but on the table, at least in the discussion phase right now, are things like reducing class sizes to half of what they are, which in turn would reduce the number of professional staff, or would increase the number of professional staff we would need, or taking the current professional staff, extending their day, if that could even happen due to their contract. I'm not familiar with that. Janet, maybe you know more than that. But if we did extend their day, we would obviously be paying. So I really do feel that if anybody knows me, they know I'm always looking to drop the budget as much as we can. Prior to this past week, I still felt that way, and I think I voiced it at the last meeting that I wasn't going to propose any reductions. After having the conversations I've had in the last week and a half, because of the uncertainty, I would be more than agreeable, if it's the board's majority opinion, to leave the budget where it is right now. I also would not like to make any severe changes as when I say we, I mean the Board of Finance sets the budget as opposed to referendum. So that's my comment. Thank you, David. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Mel. And I think, again, as we've talked, right, and people, making sure this is a budget, that this isn't dollars definitely out the door, right? And we know, like Mal, you were mentioning a lot of things about the school. We don't know, right? So today the governor closed it. We don't know what's going to happen in September. They can go in a lot of different directions. And budgets, to me, the one important thing with a budget is you want to provide flexibility in it so you can react. And I think this budget gives us some flexibility. It gives a reduction in taxes. And then we know, as we work together, I'm sure if, in the case of, I'll just make an example of the Board of Ed, if suddenly they're not spending a lot of money for whatever reason, school's closed, it's a lot cheaper. I don't think they're just going to go out and spend the money, right? Because it's budgeted there. And conversely, if there's a reduction on the school side and for whatever reason something happens on the town side that the town needs the money, I think I mentioned it last week that I think we have the spirit of we're in this together. We'll have to figure out a way out of it. So I think the amount of money that we've budgeted anyway in the expenditures gives us some flexibility, and we'll have to look throughout this year. Do we have to put spending freezes in place and things like that and react to it? We react to how the taxes are going to come in and then adjust accordingly along the way. So I'm in agreement with you now as far as cutting. I think, there's things, and, we're bringing up, and I think the Board of Selectmen did, and we're doing it. There's little pieces, but I don't think there's large numbers that both boards would be, neither boards would be looking at reducing by $1 million or $2 million, things like that. We're looking at things like $50,000, $100,000. And if we're at that small amount of difference, my gut was saying, well, why don't we push forward a budget that already shows a tax decrease, and then that gives us the flexibility. And again, it doesn't mean we've already spent the money, that we could take a look and then we could have a surplus in this budget, and then that would help us out along the way.
And I think the other thing, David, and that was very well said, by the way, I think the other thing that we need, and when I say we, I mean the Board of Finance needs to work on or to look at, is a more structured policy of what we do with end of year surpluses. I mean, we have several policies. We have a fund balance policy. We have a policy for having a minimum amount of operating funds. We have a debt management policy. We have a, help me, Elaine, the other fund that to help lower the taxes when we do hit a spike, like I believe this year we're contributing $200,000. That is debt management, right?
Debt management. Yep.
That's correct. You're right, Mal.
Thank you. I think we owe it to our taxpayers if we're budgeting dollars that they're paying in taxes and we're not using them in a year. Then there ought to be a priority of how those taxes or those tax dollars are handled at the end of the year. And, I'm not going to get into a big discussion tonight, but I think that's one way that we could help succeeding years. And not that we haven't been. The dollars that have come back have been used for say one-time expenditures that we couldn't afford to do in an operating budget. And maybe we need to do a better job just informing the public about how those are used. So I think that's kind of, in these days of tight budgets and tight dollars, we need to be very open and transparent as to not only what we're spending this year, but if we didn't spend all that was taxed for, what we're going to do with those dollars going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I make one comment to reiterate some of Mal's? This is Elaine.
Yeah, sure, Elaine.
I think it's worth mentioning that through some of these surplus dollars that were returned to the fund balance over the years, that is how the lead remediation project has been funded. So Mal's spot on with contributing some of those year-end surplus dollars back to either the debt management fund or the unassigned fund balance. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Elaine.
Dave, it's Mike. May I make a comment?
Sure. Go ahead, Mike.
I, again, appreciate everyone's input, and I am in favor of this budget, and I think we should move it forward. We are in obviously a pandemic and a period of uncertainty, but having obtained all the information and listened to everyone, I don't think we should be making any drastic cuts or adjustments to this budget based on the uncertain future. I think we've left ourselves flexibility, and if we move forward with this budget, I think it's more important that we monitor things closely, and as we learn information and get data that will help us make decisions, then we make the decisions based upon the information that we have. But right now we're just staring down a tunnel of unknown, and I don't think it would be wise to make any drastic adjustments to this budget based upon information that we don't know. We just don't know what's going to happen, and I think it's more important that we sort of wait to see what happens and move forward and adjust as necessary based upon what we learn in the future. So I am in favor of this budget, and I'm satisfied with the work that has been done with by everyone. And again, I thank everyone for all the time and effort that has gone into this, and I think it's a good budget, and based upon what we've heard from the public, the majority of the public supports it. So I don't see any reason to make any adjustments to it. Thank you.
David,
Thanks, Mike.
this is Janet.
Sure. Go ahead, Janet.
Hi. I agree. I'm in favor of the budget too. I have, 30 years of budget experience, and in doing that, I do push people out of their comfort zone, and I meant to do that. Just to see, where we can be, and I feel that this is a fair budget, and I've pushed people enough out of their comfort zone, and I'll be back next year. But for having no real understanding of what we're heading into and how many years it's going to be, I think that for now, this is a really fair budget, and it is more on the conservative side, which was where we should be.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Janet.
Chairman Vesey.
Yes, Diane.
So I might as well have something to say. I'm the last one. I support this budget as well, and I thank everyone for their hard work. I think 6 months ago, we came into this budget process. I think we were all concerned that our budget was going to go up. We knew that there were a lot of expenses on the horizon, some large projects, things that were concerning the town, the schools. I am very supportive of this budget coming in with a mill rate reduction, particularly in light of the pandemic and some of the other things that we are concerned with. And knowing that we have we passed a project to go out to bond, and that's going to be a big burden on the town as far as debt management and paying principal and interest. So that will be something that we contend with in the future. It's something that the town needs, though. So if one thing that we haven't talked about is if we artificially cut budgets too low and try to reduce budgets, then in the future, you end up having a boomerang effect almost, with having to increase the budgets to cover all of your necessary expenses. And that was something that Elaine has talked to us about too, knowing what's coming in future years, particularly with some of our debt payments. So this is a great budget. The schools have worked hard. I think the town staff has worked hard. I know the Board of Selectmen deliberated at length, talking about, COVID-19, the concerns of balancing the needs of the town, the needs of all of us, our constituents, and how we move forward. So I also support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Any other comments, Board of Finance members, discussion? Seems like we could, Donna, if you could put up on the screen the resolution. Great, thank you. So if it's okay with the Board of Finance members, can we go to this resolution? We okay with that? Or these two resolutions, the regular budget and then the CIP. And I think Mal, you read it last time. You want me to volunteer I'll read it this time? With no comment, I'm gonna go forward. Okay, Donna, you okay? And Andy, you're okay where we are right now?
Can we vote on this tonight, David? Or is it more appropriate? I mean, it sounds like we all agree, but since there is no referendum, it might be considered a little bit unusual for us to approve a budget, but not set the mill rate for another week when we've said, please, to the public, please let us know. I know we haven't made any changes, but I do know the intent of scheduling the meeting for next week. And Andy, Donna, Elaine, please correct me if I'm wrong, was to give people to react to the budget. We didn't have a lot of people here tonight. I know I'm not going to change my mind over the next week.
Yeah. So Mal, I think like mechanics, right? Are we supposed to push this resolution forward and vote on it, or are we supposed to wait until the 13th?
Yeah, that's my question.
What you can do is you can vote to move it. If you're in concurrence, you can vote to move this budget to the meeting on the 13th where it will be finally approved.
That's a good idea. And I will make the motion to accept the budget as it was presented or forwarded, transmitted to us by the Board of Selectmen, and move it forward for approval to our meeting on May 13th, 2020.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion Mal made of moving this budget, forwarding it to our meeting on May 13th, 2020. I'll do a roll call for your vote. Mal?
Aye.
You, Janet?
Aye.
Thank you. Diane?
Aye.
And Mike?
Aye.
And Dave is aye as well. So the motion passes. And I think with that motion, when we're saying the budget, that includes both the overall budget as well as the CIP. Was that the intent of what we just did?
That was my intent, but I didn't specify that.
Right, we don't have to do a different one for the CIP.
Well,
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt.
okay. Somebody else want to make that motion?
I'll make a motion that I make a motion that we pass the CIP budget as presented to us by the Board of Selectmen to May 13th, 2020.
And I second.
And that was Janet seconding. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, so let's go to vote then. I'm voting on Diane's motion to move the CIP budget to meeting on May 13th, 2020. Mal?
Mal votes aye.
Thank you, Mal. Janet?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
And Mike?
Aye.
And Dave also votes aye, so the motion passes. So thank you for submitting those motions. And I think we're on to our next agenda item then, is public comment again for the, I think, fourth time tonight. So if there's any public comments, please feel free to state them now or type comment in the chat window. Okay, doesn't look like any public comment. And so before we adjourn, right, we'll be meeting again next Wednesday, virtual meeting, 7 o'clock on May 13th, and we will finalize the budget and set the mill rate then. Okay. Anything else, anybody? Just to, I mean, we don't have it on the agenda. It's a special meeting, so we can't bring up any agenda topics, but any other comment before we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I second.
Come on. And Janet second. All those in favor of adjournment? Do we have to do
Aye.
that? I guess. Aye. Everybody aye. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good work tonight. We'll talk to you guys next week.